Hi, I'm Nathan Lozana. I'm a senior nurse in urology, stroke, and rehabilitation. My roles and responsibilities in relation to financial management within the trust are supporting the team in sticking with the budget, always being involved in improvement value schemes to identify efficiencies in order to balance the spreadsheet. I also work with the team in offsetting spends through income. And also, we tend to attend regular meetings with the finance team to go to the positions where we are at that point in time in relation to budgets. We also attend regular directory performance review meetings wherein we do look at the overall positions and combine the finance with operations. So basically understanding where we are at that point in time, our current expenditure, and how does it relate with the operational standing at that point in time. And we do work a lot with the main team themselves, and multidisciplinary team, with regards to identify overspending and finding some ways in order to alleviate that level. I think the primary goals of financial management in any NHS trust is actually to maintain the balance between budget and patient care and service delivery. So that encompasses everything under the sun. We also have to ensure that all activities the trust or any departments have to do are within the budget, because otherwise this would lead to financial issues within the trust and then to the NHS. So if it continues to persist, then this would cause a lot of pressure. Knowing for a fact that the budget in NHS are quite limited, then we would have some struggles down the line to provide the service. So therefore, the main key element is to stick with the budget. It is therefore important to work with the senior team, leadership team, in order to reduce spending, overspending in long term. We also have to have our purchases should be made in line with the financial and operational requirements of each department. I think previous years ago, Foundation Trust has more advantage compared with the Standard Trust by the fact that they got independence in seeking funding through the NHS England and Department of Health and Social Care. While the Standard Trust or Standard Hospital, they have to present it to the ICB, which is the Integrated Care Board. However, the recent change in NHS, both NHS Foundation Trust and the standard one has to go to the ICB first for approval. So before they get funding, they're not as different from how they were. So basically, there is no difference nowadays within those two hospital setting or organizations. So what usually happens is the finance team would review all the pay costings. So once they have reviewed the current spreadsheet about the pay costing, they go back to the matrons, senior nurse, and actually kind of like confirm if the posts are actually correct. Like for example, if it's a band 8A, is this right person for that post? Is it the right costing for that particular post? How many people are actually in that establishment? Is it correct? Like basically the spreadsheet that they have, is it actually reflective of what the real status of the people in the ward? So that's from a pay perspective, ensuring the right people in the right place. And second, identifying issues with regards to the non-pay, i.e. non-pay would be like, the items we tend to purchase. Is it over budgeted with some aspect, or is it correct? Or if, for example, the spreadsheet data shows a massive increase, does that actually relate to something in particular purchase within that particular month that correlates to that? Is it justifiable to do so? How can we actually think of like preventing that thing to impact on the overall costing? Example is like drugs. There's an issue with inflation. If the prices goes up, is there a way to identify, is this the best resource we have that we could use for the patient? Is there an alternative one? You go back to the team, identify with them, do we really need this particular drug? Is there anything that could be changed in place in order to maximize the resources we currently have so we didn't have any cost implication? Then you go back to the operation team for that, and then they would kind of like recommend what's the next step to be done. It's like, do we have a choice or we don't have any other alternative for it? And what happens as well is the finance team will basically look at the budget of the current financial year. Then they confirm the pay element of that one, then work together with the main key stakeholders whether the budget is enough and why it isn't enough at that time. And then is there any other extenuating circumstances that causing impact onto that? Would that particular factors affect the incoming year as well? And then set the budget proposal. So that's how actually what happens about setting annual budget. It's usually being set off in time for April, so a couple of months earlier on. They kind of like consolidate everything in order to get it presented by the end of that fiscal year. The stakeholders involved here are, of course, the main managers, but then you got the matron, the finance director, the chief finance officer, general managers, the division managers. So everyone in senior management team have to actually sit down and figure out the proposal they need to be doing. So that's from a certain directorate, for example, us, Queen Square. Then they have to present it within the trust body, and then they go higher and they present it to the NHS England and ICB board. When it comes to data, there's a specific group within the trust who does actually data analysis of each activities. So that's beyond the remits of the financial team, but a different team deals with data analysis. They basically would just feed back to the finance team what are those data, where those data is coming from, and then the finance team will be the one judging or kind of like scrutinizing if it's appropriate, is it correct. So I think that's how it goes when it comes to data. When it comes to forecasting, as I said, like they kind of like review perhaps the last 3 months of it, and then they use those data in order to forecast what could be expected to happen in terms of costing for pay and non-pay. And the kind of tools or methodologies being used, we basically use Epic. So the information you put onto Epic, the activities the patient had, the use of the specials, those kind of breakdown of all the resources are actually being jotted down, and then that actually reflects the costing being used on that particular patient, i.e. the number of days they have in the hospital. So 1 day is equivalent to this amount, then multiply by 10. So that gives the actual data, roughly an idea how much the costing of each patient is incurring while they are being hospitalized. We also use Oracle. This is like kind of like for procurement purposes. And then recently, I think the trust is introducing the NEP Reach, wherein everything is going to be put all together in one application or access, and you could actually see everything all together in there, from establishment, the cost and stuff, because at present it's kind of like segregated, so you have to open different files, while this one is quite centralized, so it's going to be easier for you to understand what actually is causing the impacts on everything that is happening within your financial budget. So what usually happens is they do kind of like anticipate, kind of like plan for provisional services that might happen in the future, and then kind of like set a little bit of money for that, kind of like a monetary reserve in case it will be needed, but this is quite rare. They tend to do that one. If, for example, a certain pressure is happening and that money reserve is not needed, but the service needs to continue. Example, there's a massive surge in A&E. The service needs to be continued, but there's no money intended for that anymore. It's very rare, but the organization tends to go back to NHS England and the ICB board, asking them for additional support simply because the service needs to continue happening at that time. So it's very rare, but it sometimes could have happened. Example, if there's a massive surge of patients in a department, what the trust would do is collaborate with the integrated care board, letting them be aware that there's a massive surge. After that, what they do is decide what's the next step. Either they will divert the patient to other hospital, And then what they tend to do next is find allocated resources elsewhere that could be diverted to support the need in that particular service. So what usually happens, a lot of like back and forth collaboration, all parties. It's an ongoing thing, review and anticipation, and kind of like forward planning of what the next step in case a situation like this would happen again in the imminent future. So basically, when a situation presents that there is a need to finance something and it's way over the budget or it's not even included within the annual budget being that year, there's this thing called capital fund. So it could be presented as a capital project. So capital money itself is very limited. So what we end up doing is do a lot of research, data gathering to support the proposal for it to be approved. We tend to prioritize ones that has most impact on patients, prioritize which one is worth doing, which one will bring more benefit to the patient, and which one falls within the capital bid. So I think it's around kind of like, if it's way more than, I think 9 or 15,000, then it has to be presented as a capital money. An example for this, if there's a broken window that doesn't fall within the limits of the CBRE. So if it's really gonna cost more than like a 10,000, therefore it has to fall into a capital project, because it has a massive effect onto or impact to the patient, i.e. they feel cold, the windows have been swart in it. So that's a higher priority need. So therefore that could be an argument for it to be approved. So when you propose something, these are the things, the impact of this one, what is the benefit of that, what is the disadvantage if we're not gonna have it in place, what are the risks that would happen, the safety risks that would be impacting that, which could lead to further costing down the line, and then is it something that falls within the capital money limit, then therefore that will be a priority for them to put that investment into. What usually happens in all organizations, all the chief finance officer of each organization do meet up with the ICB, which is an Integrated Care Board. So in there, they present their challenges, their accomplishments, the innovations that they have done so far, and they basically shares this information with everyone for them to be able to pick up strategies that they actually could use back to their own organization to get a positive outcome, see if that particular action plan would yield a good result for them as well. So basically, they all collaborate together to find out the best way to solve a certain issues. To number one key priority is to ensure we've got financial sustainability. We have to make sure that we got enough finances in the future to be able to provide the level of services that is required. Second is to optimize services. I say that we work with the Integrated Care Board, the local healthcare unit, and to make sure that the inpatient can go back to the community as soon as possible, as long as they're well enough, so that it frees up the bed intended for the next patient that will be incoming, and then facilitates smooth flow, bed flow, and provide provision of services. Third is we're trying to move from current situation to a more digital ecosystem. So basically, like patient now can access the blood results or tests or kind of like information about the care through the NHS app. And then obviously this is like in collaborative working with NHS England. So instead of a patient calling somebody, getting the results, which would take time away from patient care delivery, so you could actually check on their apps and then actually have direct access with their care as well. Lastly, UCLH is also trying to expand its current diagnostic capabilities so that they can do more testing onto people and imaging, all of that sort, and therefore patients can be treated quickly rather than for having a long waiting time period for the imaging to happen. Then they could facilitate it to be done in a shorter time frame, right? And after that, then they could go back to their normal daily